Yes, I'm happy to welcome Dr. Swaminathan to this 5 days FTP, and he's an excellent speaker with a lot of credentials. So it will be a great delight for the participants to listen to his lecture. So now I request Kirtana to introduce the guest to the audience. Over
A
to
fresh
Kirtana.
morning and a warm welcome to everyone to the final day of the 5-day FTP program on ML5G. I am very much elated to introduce the first speaker of the day, Dr. R. Swaminathan. Dr. R. Swaminathan received his BTech degree in Electronics and Communication Engineering from Sastra University, Tanjavur in 2009, his master's degree in Communication Systems from the College of Engineering Guindy, Anna University in 2011, and the PhD degree from IIT Kharagpur in 2016. He worked as a postdoctoral fellow with Nanyang Technological University, Singapore from 2015 to 2019. He is currently working as an assistant professor with the Department of Electrical Engineering, IIT Indore. He is the author and co-author of 21 international journal publications, including 14 publications in reputed IEEE transactions, journals, and letters. His current research include but not limited to the efficient design of space air-ground integrated networks with hybrid optical RF wireless communications, unmanned aerial vehicle assisted free space optics communication, development of novel algorithms for blind parameter estimation of forward error correcting codes and interlevers. Beyond 5G and 6G wireless systems and intelligent reflecting surfaces aided wireless communications. He received the gold medal from the College of Engineering Guindy, Anna University. He has been serving as a reviewer for reputed IEEE journals and as a TPC member for reputed IEEE conferences. We welcome you, sir. Without any delay, I hand over the session to you.
Yes. So thank you, Ms. Keertana, for this introduction, and thank you, Selvaraj sir, for asking me to take a session. Indeed, Selvaraj sir was the one who was initially guiding me during my. He was my initial supervisor during my PhD tenure at IIT Kharagpur. After that, also I mainly collaborated with him, and he's also one of the reasons for me to complete the PhD degree, especially on time. So, sir was kind enough to ask me to take a session in this particular faculty development program or short-term course. So I'll share my screen. Start. Yes. So the screen is visible.
Ah,
Yes, sir,
yes.
visible.
Okay. And sometimes, if it is required, I will also switch over to the notebook which I have. Sometimes, if we have any derivations or to understand much better, I will also switch over to that. So fine. So let us start with the session. So today's session probably I hope I can take up to some 10:30, 10:45 around, and then I can leave question answer sessions for around 10-15 minutes. I hope that is fine, Nasser.
Ah, yes, yes, fine,
Yeah.
fine.
Okay. 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 So this today's sessions mainly I'm going to concentrate on aerial platform based free space optics communication, especially for future generation networks, which includes 5G, satellite communication, indeed, etc. So first part of the talk, I will be mainly concentrating on the various use cases of these aerial platforms, especially in case of a terrestrial and satellite communication systems or networks. After that, probably I will touch upon the research which we have done in under this particular topic for the past 2 years or so. Probably we will I will present few results and make you to understand the importance of this aerial platforms, especially in the satcom perspective, satellite communication perspectives. So this is what would be the outline of today's talk. So would be the, as I have mentioned, various use cases and how we can link free space optics with the free space optics with the aerial platforms. Then what are all the use cases and applications of such scenarios? Mainly what motivates us to integrate these two technologies, which is Aerial platform is one such a system, as well as you are going to link it with the free space optics communication. So what are all the motivations behind that, and then what are all the different aerial platforms which are available, as well as we will take one simple research study, and I would try to explain the importance of such aerial platforms, especially in the context of an free space optics communication systems. So aerial platforms, there are various aerial platforms. Most commonly, the terminologies or the platforms which you will come across is this UAV, which is unmanned aerial vehicles. And then this also occasionally people come across this particular terminology, which is also very important. It is high altitude platform stations, or otherwise in short, which is called as HAPS. Similar to HAPS, there is also something called as LAPS, low altitude platform stations, and probably not towards much of a technical term, they would also call this aerial platforms as airships, balloons, etc. These are all some kind of very normal terminologies they would also use. But mainly in the literature, you will come across these aerial platforms mainly under the categories of UAVs, HAPS, and then LAPS. Of course, they are going to play a wide role or a vital role in beyond 5G as well as 6G wireless communication systems. We will also touch upon where it plays a role and how it is going to fit into the beyond 5G systems as well as 6G wireless communication systems. So linked to this aerial platform, there is also one more very interesting research area which is gaining traction among the researchers, is this space air ground integrated networks. The space air ground networks is nothing but the integration of the satellite, then your aerial platforms, and your ground networks, basically, and your ground networks. The ground networks can be a simple ground station or a user equipment which is there in the terrestrial aspect, terrestrial side of it. So that those networks comprises of this ground. And then aerial platforms, of course, whatever you have, either it is an unmanned aerial vehicle or HAPS. So that comprises or that contribute to this air networks. And then space, obviously, it is satellite communication. So it is the integration of these three. Of course, around 3, 4, 5 years back, there was even including now up to today, some research work you would also notice in this satellite terrestrial communication networks, basically hybrid satellite terrestrial. So a satellite and then linked to a ground-based relay and then linked to an user equipment like this you would come across. It is a hybrid satellite terrestrial networks. However, here you have between your satellite and ground network itself, you have an aerial network where your aerial platforms like HAPS and UAVs are going to play a major role. So what are all the use cases and what are all the advantages? Of course, we are going to see that. But to highlight few of the use cases which you can see, this UAVs especially, you can consider it either as a flying aerial base stations, basically. Flying aerial base stations, of course, you would see it would be a ground-based network. However, in many scenarios, if say, for example, a disaster scenario where your base station is not in proper shape or something so that an emergency case which is arising out of it. So you are in a situation to use your aerial networks, which includes UAVs or HAPS, in place of this base stations, which is ground-based base stations. Of course, that is how they call it, as a flying aerial base station, as well as a mobile relay station. It is also possible. More details on this, I would be covering much more in detail. But as such, you can see that this is mostly these UAVs, which you could have already seen. And this is what they categorize it as HAPS. This is airships or balloons. But this is called as usually this HAPS. And the main difference or such you can come across this UAVs and HAPS is the height. So if you are deploying this aerial platform at the height of say 5 kilometers within that, then of course it should be an UAV which is pretty much small in size. Of course, HAPS, which is slightly bigger in size, they might be deploying at a height of say 20 kilometers above that. In fact, that is why it is called as it's a high altitude platform station. Sometimes the other expansion for HAPS, you would find it as high altitude pseudo satellite. Okay, that is also called as HAPS, basically high altitude. Of course, high altitude in the sense the altitude which they define in the literature is of the order of 20 kilometers from the ground level. and then high altitude pseudo satellite, basically. So in place of instead of satellite, you can call it as a you can use it as a pseudo satellite. That's how the terminology has come. Okay, so there are various ways with which you can see these aerial platforms and its applications. However, the main advantages, basically, it can connect to the ground users via line of sight links. Basically, that is very, very important, especially if you are putting a ground based relay node. Of course, you cannot establish a line of sight communication. But if you are putting it at a height of say 2-3 kilometers or within 5-kilometer range, if you are putting it, there is a higher chance that you can able to establish a line of sight link with the ground based nodes or ground based users. Of course, line of sight will be very important, especially from the point of free space optics perspective, which I will also be telling about the nature of this free space optics communication. Then you can better appreciate the advantages of this UAV in the aspect of establishing the line of sight links, as well as it is more of a dynamic deployment. So you can deploy it according to your requirements, and you can allocate it to the different users or controllers, especially on demand. So it is you could able to deploy it dynamically. Means it is not fixed. The location need not be fixed. You can dynamically move the location, and you can satisfy the requirements. Of course, multiple aerial platforms or multiple UAVs, they offer ubiquitous connectivity to the ground users. Of course, the connectivity will always remain, and you can able to establish this connection, and the connection, the link reliability will always be intact when you are using a multiple UAV networks or swarm of UAV networks. And then other advantages, it can expand the communication network in a fast and cost-effective ways, basically. Of course, the cost-effective ways in the sense, deployment of ground-based nodes compared to this UAV. So, of course, they will have a very high operational cost, as well as so many costs will be incurred in deploying ground-based relay nodes. However, UAVs or HAPS, the deployment as well as the cost-wise, it is slightly on the advantageous side compared to the ground-based relay nodes. And then that which I have already touched upon is, yes, this easy maintenance and environmental friendliness, of course, and especially in the emergency situations, handling an emergency situations, especially in a disaster-prone region, where your base stations and everything has been damaged, then definitely you can use your UAVs as an alternative to establish the communications, basically. So emergency situations, as well as to establish line of sight links, this UAVs are in particular, or in general, aerial platforms are going to play a major role. So one such use cases which you can see is there are 3 different use cases with which the UAVs or the aerial platforms can be broadly classified. One is the UAV aided ubiquitous coverage. So the coverage should be there in different sort of situations. It should always, you should have the link. It's what is ubiquitous coverage. It should be there irrespective of whatever be the scenario. That's what the terminology ubiquitous basically linked to. So you can see that it is basically deployed to assist the existing communication infrastructure, of course, which I have mentioned. Suppose if this particular base station is an overloaded base station, when you are imagine a scenario where you are going to live stream an event which is happening in a bigger stadium. Of course, if that base station which is in operation, it is getting overloaded, of course you can use your HAPS in place of your overloaded base station, as well as a malfunctioning base station. If it is there, in place of that also, you can use your UAV to establish the communication. Of course, it is mainly to actually link the communication between the access networks and the backhaul core networks, as such you say. Access to core network, that communication is mainly established by this particular UAV, or in cellular networks, we can call it as a backhaul networks, right? So from base station, from your mobile station to base station, whatever is happening, that is an access network or access link they call, and it is called the front haul communication. Backhaul communication is mainly after your base station, wherever it is going, whether it is a central controller, those links, they are called as backhaul links, and the networks and the nodes which comprises of this link is called as the backhaul networks basically. So from base station to any other base station, which is a macro cell base station or a kind of a central controller, so that we call that as the backhaul links or the backhaul networks. So this helps either in the front haul perspective also, because if this base stations are, if the first front haul communication based base station is getting damaged, of course you can use this as an alternative, as well as in the backhaul links also it might be of useful in nature. So two example scenarios is what I have mentioned. One is the rapid service recovery after partial or complete infrastructure damage due to natural disasters, which I have already mentioned, as well as base station offloading in extremely crowded areas. So especially in a stadium during a sports event, because especially this particular use case will play a major role in 5G and beyond wireless systems, as one of the use cases of this 5G is the enhanced broadband, EMBB. That's what they call, right? Enhanced mobile broadband. So, so those enhanced mobile broadband and all, it is possible, especially getting your connections very high definition based connections and high definition based videos. You could able to watch it live stream while you are watching the match. That is how it links to enhanced mobile broadband. Enhanced mobile broadband means wherever you are, kind of you should be able to get your connections perfectly, and you could able to watch high quality transmissions while in movement, or when you are watching some matches among 10,000 sort of audience in a stadium. Still you could able to, you should be in a situation to get a good quality information transmission as well as reception. So those are all the aspects with which these UAVs or HAPs or in particular or in general aerial platforms are going to play a major role, especially in the 5G and beyond wireless systems. So, and then if you see the other aspects of it, which is like remote connectivity can also be deployed. So suppose if some controller is there over here, say this could be the frontline command center, and if you want to send the command to the proper some military operations, if you are going to take place, and if there are so much of obstacles which are present in the form of a valley or the hill, then of course you can deploy your UAV here. It would act as a relays basically, and that's what the second use cases is being mentioned as the UAV aided relaying. So especially this provides a wireless connectivity between two or more distance users or user groups, probably without direct reliable communication. Of course, there is no direct reliable communication possible between this. So you could able to deploy the UAVs or the aerial platforms above the hills or something, and then you could able to establish the link. So this could be the communication, that's what I mentioned, between the command center and frontline and the command center, especially for these are all the frontline forces, and this is the command center. So this is the command center and this is the frontline forces. So to establish the communication, especially in these sort of scenarios, these UAVs or aerial platforms are going to play a big role. And then finally, in the aspects of sensor networks also, it is mainly useful for disseminating the information as well as collecting the information from a widely distributed wireless sensor nodes, which helps in the applications such as precision agriculture applications and etc. So mainly, of course, whatever I have worked so far is mainly in the aspect of UAV based relaying and its connection with the free space optics communication. There comes the next topic, which is free space optics. Of course, it comes under the category of an optical wireless communication based system. Especially the motivation behind this is the RF based communication is always capacity limited. And you can see that in recent past years, wireless devices have grown leaps and bounds than everyone would have imagined. So because of the increase in the usage of wireless devices, so the demand for high data rate applications is also growing up. So, but the drawback in the usage of the RF systems is based on the electromagnetic spectrum, which is capacity limited, as well as it is costly, as most of the bands are licensed. So so people which they are targeting for data heavy wireless applications, especially in 5G beyond and 6G wireless communication, they are also looking for other possible options for wireless communications. And growing interest has been witnessed in the research and development of optical wireless communication systems in the recent years. Optical wireless communication systems, generally, I could see in the literature, it is broadly classified into three kinds. One is the visible light communication, another one is the free space optics communication, another one is the ultraviolet non-line of sight communication. So if this optical wireless communication, if you establish or if it is being used over the infrared frequency range, then it is free space optics. And if it is uses the visible light frequency ranges for communication, then it is the visible light communication. The visible light communication, as such, the word comes mainly because you are using the optical carriers in the visible light frequency range, basically. Okay, so VLC, and then ultraviolet non-line of sight communication uses the ultraviolet frequency bands. So VLC, basically, it is mainly target the applications of the indoor scenario. I think there was also a talk I saw, concurrent illumination. I hope that is mainly concurrent illumination and communication. I think it is mainly towards the VLC, visible light communications. So mainly towards the indoor application scenario. And free space optics, that is which is operated over the infrared frequency range, around that range, that is mainly towards the outdoor scenario. Of course, this VLC and FSO, they have the limitation of the line of sight links. Of course, the transmitter and receive apertures instead of antennas. Antennas, we use the terminology for RF based communication, but free space optics communication or optical wireless communication, we say it as transmit aperture as well as receive aperture. Of course, there should exist a strict line of sight communication or line of sight scenario between your transmit aperture and receive aperture. That should be there, which is a drawback, especially in case of a free space optics communication, especially in an urban environment. So you will have tall buildings and so much. So it is there in an urban environment. So it is very difficult to always have a line of sight scenario exist between two nodes. So probably alternatively, they have also thought about something called as UVNLOS, ultraviolet non-line of sight communication. It is an optical wireless communication which is operating over ultraviolet bands, but even the requirement of line of sight link between the transmitter and receiver is not. It is relaxed over here. That constraint can be relaxed, and it helps in supporting the non-line of sight communication. That is what the word is also, the technology is also being coined with the name as ultraviolet non-line of sight communication. So these three, but somehow FSO gained much more traction, especially when it comes to the outdoor scenario. So as I have already mentioned, a term used for OWC in outdoor scenario, optical wireless communication in outdoor scenario, is what is FSO communication. It refers to the line of sight communication between two fixed points using the optical carriers, and the main advantage is the higher data rate up to gigabits per second for short range transmission up to few kilometers, and mainly the carrier frequencies, whatever the optical carrier frequencies of the order of terahertz is not being licensed. Of course, that as of now we can say it as an advantage, but once the deployment and everything have started, I hope that might be also, that cost effectiveness factor may not play a bigger role. Of course, now as of now it is not licensed, so it is not as costly as of your RF electromagnetic spectrum. So of course, since enhanced mobile broadband and various use cases, if you could able to see in your 5G and beyond systems, okay, so your free space optics communication could able to satisfy most of the requirements of your upcoming wireless communication systems, basically. So compared to RF, yes, I've already mentioned. So you could able to get more bandwidth out of it because you are moving higher in the frequency range. So you could able to extract more bandwidth of the order of say 100 gigahertz to few terahertz compared to the RF. Of course, even if you are taking the help of millimeter wave wireless communication, of course you could not able to reach the bandwidth which you could get from an FSO based communication. So of course, bandwidth and data rate advantage is also there. You could able to see that 10 to the power 4 times the higher bandwidth you could able to extract from an FSO based communication systems compared to an RF systems. As well as you could able to see that the link security, high immunity interference, or high reuse factors. This will be the major advantage compared to the RF communication, because of the fact that the beams, the optical beams are narrow. It is more of narrower in nature. So that's what. So it is very narrower compared to that of an RF. Okay, so the RF propagation is kind of a broadcasting phenomena, if you see, but here in FSO it is not more of a broadcasting scenario. It is a line of sight communications without broadcasting phenomena. So the beam width or beam spread is more of narrower compared to that of the RF based communication, which helps us in achieving high reuse factor. You can reuse that links in a nearby region also without much of a problem of interference. That is what is high immunity to interference, as well as when the beam is narrower, you could achieve a better link security, because if some intruder comes, of course you can able to easily track that, because there would be a complete link blockage, or at least almost 80-90% of your link gets blockage, means easily you could able to infer from your receiver received signal that some blockage has come, and you could able to easily put a remedy factors for that. So of course better link security is there compared to that of the RF based communication systems. Then compared to that of the optical fiber, this comes mainly in the aspect of this backhaul communication, backhaul network, as I've already mentioned, from your base stations to whatever the other nodes which it connects, a controller or a macro cell base station. So usually either in the current 4G networks, either the transmission is either through an RF link or mostly through the optical fiber cable. So there only they are thinking to establish this particular free space optics, because those two nodes, right, especially from the base station to a central controller, so those can be a fixed nodes with which you could able to, those would be a fixed nodes. Basically the problem comes when you are trying to establish a free space optics communication between a fixed node and a mobile node. That is in any way not going to happen. Your user equipment to base station communication, of course, is not going to, most likely it is not to come up, it's not going to come up with the free space optics communication, because you will be mobile in nature, and communication always having a line of sight link between your mobile station and base station, it's going to be highly impossible. Of course that is going to stay as RF, but this backhaul links, which they were trying with, whatever they are trying with earlier in an optical fiber, using optical fiber, they are trying to replace that with the, they are thinking of the possibility of replacing your optical fiber with the free space optics communication. Of course, mainly because of the advantages of the cheap installation cost with faster deployments. So these are all few of the advantages, especially for free space optics communication compared to RF, as well as compared to an optical fiber. So coming to the applications of free space optics communication, as I've already mentioned, backhaul, mainly backhaul applications. You could able to see a backhaul scenario here where a mobile base station is connecting you to a central controller. Okay, so there you can use an FSO link as well as backhaul links for ship connectivity. So if the ship wants to communicate with the infrastructure at the land, or if the ship to ship connectivity where there will not be major obstacles, of course, the atmospheric factors will be there to affect the particular affect the optical links. We are going to see that what are all the atmospheric factors which indeed affects the link. Of course, there is a possibility of having a line of sight scenario between ship to ship as well as ship to infrastructure. There also the usage of optical links, especially free space optics links, is going to be possible. And then again, remote connectivity here also. If one user is in the remote hill and another one is in the remote island, and there is a huge valley in between. So here, huge valley means if there is a land in between, yes, you can deploy it over the top of any building, and then you can use an optical wireless link. If there is a big valley, then comes the usage of an aerial platform to connect these two particular nodes. One node is in the remote hill, another one is in the remote island, and if there is a big valley, which if there is a big valley means then you could not put any ground-based station to connect them. Of course, you can, then comes the usage of your aerial platforms or UAVs also. Of course, if you have any ground-based nodes to deploy, then you can put it and establish a free space optics links between these two remote locations. Okay, then inter-campus connectivity, because there is a huge possibility that line of sight exists between inside your campus between the nodes. So inter-campus connectivity, these are all the major applications, but mainly, as I have seen in the literature, they are targeting this as any backhaul applications. They are targeting free space optics communication, especially in place of usage of optical fibers. Of course, apart from being used in the backhaul application, so free space optics communication is also being targeted to use for satellite communication between the ground station to the satellite. ground station to the satellite connections using free space optics communication. The major motivations and all goes towards, of course, there is always a requirement or a need for large communication capacity and reliable communication links in SATCOM systems, especially because of the number of natural disasters which are keep on growing. And you can see a data also that around 396 natural disasters have been recorded in 2019, with more than 95 million people affected across the globe, out of which in the Asian subcontinent you could able to see, which is like a 40% of the total number of disasters among this occurred in Asia. So it is always important for Asian countries, including India, to deploy more satellites and increasing the monitoring frequency, observation area, and the resolution of images obtained from the satellite. Basically, if you want to obtain the higher resolutions, especially you need to have a larger communication capacity as well as reliable communication links in order to obtain the resolution of images, obtain a better resolution of images from the satellite. So currently, most of these SATCOM links are RF based with the data rate limited to a few hundreds of Mbps. Of course, again, similar to that of the previous part which I have mentioned, of course, the growing interest has been witnessed in the R&D of establishing a free space optics links between a ground station and satellite, which can offer up to a larger data rates of up to Gbps. Again, so terrestrial communications, especially in the backhaul scenario, and SATCOM between a ground station to a low Earth orbit satellite or something of that sort, they are you could able to see the literatures coming up with this free space optics links in these two major scenarios, especially one for backhaul networks and another one for the SATCOM, as well as you could able to see also some upcoming area of mixed FSO RF, where the mixed FSO RF in the sense this is also mixed, right? If you can imagine a scenario where you are having a user equipment, then base station, then connects to a central controller, if you are having. So, of course, this user equipments to base station always you can establish with an RF link, and this you can establish with an FSO link. This is kind of a mixed system. So, the first link is RF and second link is FSO. The last mile connectivity is what they say. Whatever the last link, okay, they would say it as last mile connectivity, because this link requires a higher, it should have a higher capacity. Basically, it basically connects all the information and pumping it. So this link requires a higher capacity. So you can establish an FSO as a last mile connectivity, and then your RF can be the front haul link. So this is kind of a mixed FSO RF based scenarios, which you can also refer to the literature close to. Around 5 to 10 years, the research works are also being taking place in case of this mixed FSO RF based systems. Okay, so these are all few of the applications of this FSO in terrestrial as well as SATCOM, mainly coming into the point of the limitations. So the main limitations, first thing I would speak about is the atmospheric turbulence. Basically, this atmospheric turbulence effects, which includes two effects, basically, which is called as the beam scintillation and beam wander. These are all the two atmospheric turbulence effects which affects your optical signal. This is one among the three major limitations of this FSO communication. Basically, it arises mainly due to the non-uniformity or large-scale inhomogeneities in the turbulent atmosphere. Non-uniformity in the temperature, pressure, and large-scale inhomogeneities. Meanings you can think of your atmosphere as a viscous fluid. Okay, as a fluid you can think. Of course, the fluid will have two distinct states. One is the laminar state. Another one is the turbulent state. Basically, laminar state means whenever some signal or optical signal is passing through, the laminar state in the atmosphere means the velocity characteristics would be uniform. Means it would not affect the link performance to a greater extent. The velocity characters would be uniform. However, when your optical link is encountering the atmosphere, okay, where it is of a turbulent in nature, means the velocity characteristics of the various particles as well as everything is non-uniform. There comes the non-uniformity, a large-scale inhomogeneities. Those set, we call it as the turbulent eddies, basically. So those group, that is those portion of atmosphere where your velocity characteristics are non-uniform, they call it as turbulent eddies. Okay. So depending upon your beam size or the wavelength of your incoming optical signal, as well as this turbulent eddies in this atmosphere, the size of this turbulent eddies which would be present in the atmosphere, size of the turbulent eddies means how much portion of that atmosphere will be encountering this turbulent flow. Okay, so depending upon that size and your incoming optical signal size, comparison of this size, how the beam size is linked to the turbulent eddy size, depending upon that, there are major effects. For example, this beam scintillation arises when this turbulent eddy size is of the order of beam size. Okay, so this beam scintillation arises when the eddy size of the order of beam size. Okay, beam size means basically your optical beam. Okay, so if I though I have not mentioned it, you can imagine as your the generation of optical signal is, you would generate a typical electrically modulated signal. Say you can imagine it as an MPSK waveform, and that MPSK waveform is going to modulate the intensity of your laser. Okay, that is what is intensity modulation. So that is how in the transmitter there comes the conversion of an electrical signal into an optical signal. Your electrically modulated signal is going to modulate the intensity of your laser beam, which is called as the intensity modulation, which is one among the modulation techniques which is used for an optical wireless communication. In this case, it is also called as subcarrier intensity modulation, because you are using an electrically modulated carrier which modulates the intensity of the laser beam. So of course there would be a beam size. Okay, and that beam size, typically the beam size, the diameter or something, you can call it as beam width. Okay, that beam width is not going to stay constant throughout that. Because of the atmospheric factors, there would always be an increase in the beam width at your receiver. Your transmit beam width and your receiver beam width is not going to same because of various atmospheric factors which are going to play a role. Of course, now comes, I have already mentioned this this turbulent eddies. Okay, that is a portion in the atmosphere where the existence of non-uniformity or large-scale inhomogeneities in the velocity characteristics would be existing. Velocity as well as non-uniformity in the temperature, pressure, everything in that portion. Okay, whenever that particular portion in terms of size, it is of the order of the beam size, of course, the effect which is going to come here is the beam scintillation. Okay, beam scintillation. Of course, if you want to, beam scintillation, what it causes is, it is going to cause a loss of signal to noise ratio, because this beam scintillation is going to cause your random fluctuations in your signal strength. You can easily link to this as your fading, basically, in your RF communication. The RF communication, the fading arises mainly because of this multipath. Here, there is no concept of multipath as such, because it is going to be a line of sight communication. So this large-scale inhomogeneity is present in the atmosphere, which causes the beam scintillation, especially when the turbulent eddy size is of the order of the beam size. Okay, this beam scintillation is going to cause your fluctuations in the signal strength. Fluctuations in the signal strength is what is called as your fading. That is why this beam scintillation is otherwise also called as atmospheric turbulence-induced fading. That fading is being induced by this atmospheric turbulence, that is beam scintillation. One of the atmospheric turbulence effects, which is beam scintillation. Okay, the other effect is there under the atmospheric turbulence effects itself, beam scintillation. Another one is beam wander. Beam wander is slightly different if it is the turbulent eddy size is greater than that of your beam size. Okay, if your turbulent eddy size is greater than that of your beam size, then beam wander means it is going to that particular this particular effect, that is beam wander effect, is going to cause a misalignment. Basically, it is going to deflect your beam. Okay, because of that atmospheric effect, the beam is going to get deflected because of this beam wander effects. Okay, that it is going to cause a misalignment or something called as a pointing error. And in this case, if the pointing errors means if the beam is getting deflected because of this beam wander effects. Okay, so it can be called as the beam wander induced pointing errors. Basically, pointing errors is, of course, is also called as the misalignment errors. Okay, so here this misalignment is mainly because of the deflection in the beam, and the deflection in the beam is mainly due to what? Due to the beam wander effects. Okay, of course, if that beam wander effects is mainly due to what? If the turbulent eddies, if the atmospheric turbulent eddies, or if it is greater than that of your beam size, right? Of course, it is going to deflect your beam, and then it is going to cause a misalignment or pointing errors, which is primarily due to beam wander, and it is called as the beam wander induced pointing errors. So beam Vander induced pointing errors as well as beam scintillation, which is mainly due to the non-uniformity or large-scale inhomogeneities in the temperature, pressure, and velocity characteristics in the atmosphere, those two comes under the category of atmospheric turbulence effects. Atmospheric turbulence effects. Okay, so that is one thing. And then separately, I have mentioned, if you see, pointing or misalignment errors separately, because this pointing or misalignment errors is mainly due to the vibrations, which is, of course, if it is there in your transmit aperture or your receiver aperture, due to building vibrations or increase in temperature and pressure, your apertures, if it is misaligned, usually you would deploy that these apertures would be seeing each other. Of course, because of the building vibrations and increase in temperature and pressure of that particular system, there might be a possibility of misalignment because of the misalignment, because of the system itself, basically transmitter or receiver system. If the misalignment is causing because of the transmitter or receiver system, because of the building vibrations or the other factors, then it is simply pointing errors or misalignment errors. There are two ways with which you get the pointing error or misalignment errors. One is the transmitter or receiver system itself can cause that because of the misalignment between them. And the second one is the atmospheric effect, that is the beam Vander effect can induce the pointing error which deflects the beam. Okay, so in that case, the transmitter and receiver system would be intact, no problem, no vibrations or so, it would be fixed. But your atmosphere, which is present in between that, right, that is going to deflect your beam. That is beam Vander induced pointing error, which comes under the atmospheric turbulence effect. This pointing or misalignment errors, which I have mainly mentioned, is because of the system, either your transmitter aperture system or your receiver aperture system. Because of the vibrations or because of the wind also, it can happen that it gets misaligned, your transmitter or receiver. That is going to cause a misalignment or pointing errors. Misalignment or pointing errors means whatever the beam which you are transmitting, right? Of course, majority of the portion of the beam should fall in your detector, which is your photo detector or something which you would be using. So majority of the power of that particular beam should fall on that detector. Then only you could able to get an equivalent electrical current. You would convert that into an electrical signal and you would perform the demodulation and detection operation. Okay, if majority of the power is not going to concentrate on your photo detector or the detector which you are going to use, then there is, of course, if there is a misalignment, of course, majority of the power will not be falling on your detector. There would be kind of a misalignment which would be happening, and majority of the power which is going to get wasted, it is not going to fall on your either photovoltaics or your photo detector, whatever you are going to use. Then of course it comes the loss of signal to noise ratio, and it is going to affect the reliability of your link. Now the third thing is, of course, it is atmospheric loss, which is mainly due to the attenuation of optical signals due to weather conditions. The various weather conditions would be causing attenuation for this optical signal, especially the major main weather condition which affects these optical signal is nothing but this fog, snow, and haze. These three are the major deteriorating factor for this your optical signal. Means you can see fog attenuation, you can see up to 40 dB per kilometer. Okay, that is how it ranges from. But of course, I have never written anything called rain here. Rain is not a major limiting factor for your optical signal. Your RF is mainly affected by your rain. Of course, your RF is not going to get affected by your fog, snow, and haze. The fog attenuation or haze attenuation for RF is quite minimum. Of course, your rain attenuation for your FSO is minimum. Basically, there comes the complementary nature of both this particular signals, FSO or optical signal and your RF signal. There comes the usage or the motivation behind the usage of an hybrid links. Okay, if the climatic condition for an FSO link is not supportive, then of course it would be supportive for RF. So you use an RF as a backup. There comes the importance of a hybrid links. Okay, because of the complementary characteristics of your RF and FSO communication, because your RF communication is prone to small scale fading and then attenuation mainly due to rain. So these are all the major limiting factors for your RF communication. Of course, your FSO communication is not sensitive to small scale fading because there is no broadcasting phenomena as such. There is no multipath as such for your FSO communication. And the rain is not going to be the major limiting factor for your FSO link. Okay, of course, your FSO is having a limiting factor of atmospheric turbulence, pointing errors, and atmospheric loss due to fog, snow, and haze, which is not going to affect your RF signal. So there comes the complementary nature. If one link is not supportive, of course, you can use the backup as the other link. But in the main literature, they would have proposed it as free space optics communication as a priority between two fixed nodes, of course, because of the advantages of achieving the higher data rate and many other advantages. Of course, if the link is not supportive, then you can switch over to the backup RF link, which even if you don't want to compromise on the capacity of the link, instead of an RF over microwave band, especially sub 6 gigahertz, instead of a sub 6 gigahertz link, you can use a millimeter wave link also as a backup. There comes the evolution of a parallel area, which is called as a hybrid FSO RF systems. Okay, whatever I explained before in the previous, this thing is a mixed system, mixed FSO RF systems. This is this slide itself I have told about the mixed systems, where in one link you use RF and other link you use FSO. This is mixed. Okay, whereas a hybrid system, which you are going to see, of course, I would touch upon that also. A hybrid system, right? So you would primarily use an FSO link, and if the FSO link is not supportive because of the major deteriorating factor, you would use a backup as an RF link. Either this or that, or you can use both also simultaneously, depending upon how you are effectively you are switching. There comes switching schemes or switching strategies between FSO and RF, which we have heavily worked upon in the last close to 4 to 5 years, efficient switching schemes between this FSO RF with the improvement in the reliability and the capacity. Anyway, the main thing over here is the main limitations which we have seen, especially this main limitations which I have told, these three major limitations which I have told is mainly for a terrestrial scenario as well as a SATCOM based scenario without UAV. If you are having UAV, there might be an additional limitation which will come, that I'm going to let you know. Now, where comes we have seen the UAV based use cases and applications. What are all the plausible applications which you can target with respect to UAV? Then we saw a free space optics communication and its applications and main limitations, advantages, as well as limitations of a free space optics communication. Now comes the coining of these two terminologies and its applications, especially UAV assisted FSO. UAV assisted free space optics communication, where it comes, yes, of course, for an FSO communication, the receiver needs to be placed within the line of sight of the transmitter, especially in an urban environment with tall buildings for backhaul networks. You can able to see this between the source and destination node. If there are high-rise buildings because of the growing urban environment with the tall buildings, of course, you could not able to establish a direct link, an FSO link between the source and destination. There comes the importance of a UAV based relay, or there comes the importance of the ground based relay also. Of course, you can use a you can deploy the receiver apertures or as a relay nodes in other tall buildings, but there is always a problem with the ground based relay nodes. Basically, it is always you would not possible to obtain the permission for deploying this ground based relays, especially in an optimal location. You cannot deploy just like that randomly in some location. You should pick an optimal location. In that optical location, getting permission for deploying might be possible or may not be possible. That is one case. And even if it is possible, if it is a rental location, then there is a risk of security and other aspects that would be there. So there is always there might be situation which arises that you can't always rely on the ground-based relay nodes, as well as increase in the number of relay nodes. Suppose this would be one relay node. After that, with this relay node itself, you could not able to reach destination. Again, you have to put another relay node. Again, you have to put another relay node. That is a multi-hop based relay nodes you have to put in order to establish the free space optics communication or FSO link between your source and destination. So in place of that, you can put simply an UAV. Of course, you are going to deploy it with the higher altitude. So, of course, the problem of causing an obstacle between your source and the UAV links, as well as between your UAV relay and your destination, is highly unlikely. So there comes the usage of UAV, especially it helps in establishing the line of sight link between your source and destination. In this case, a line of sight FSO link. Already I have mentioned, it helps in establishing a line of sight link between the ground users. That's what I have mentioned. But line of sight in RF, yes, of course, in RF also it plays a role. But in FSO, that is the main requirement for an FSO-based communication. Line of sight, establishing or enabling a line of sight link is a major requirement. And of course, if you are bringing your free space optics communication in your future generation, of course, that is going to come up in your future urban environment scenario, especially for linking your backhaul networks. If you are going to deploy these free space optics links, you can't always rely on your ground-based relay nodes. Okay, and you are going to rely on your you can rely on your aerial platform-based relay nodes, which can help in establishing or enabling the line of sight FSO links. Okay, this is one particular use case or application as such, or also you can see, as well as in regular without UAVs also basically this is also another case where you can use multiple UAVs in order to link between your source and destination. This depends on it is not like one UAV alone is suffice. In some cases, it might be there. So you can also use a multiple UAV-based relay nodes in connecting between source and destination. Anyway, in summary, it states that compared with the conventional terrestrial relays, UAV-based relays is going to have an intrinsic advantage of establishing a line of sight link by adjusting the position dynamically. See, the optimal location I mentioned, right? You could able to play with your optical location with your UAV. It's not going to be a major problem. You can dynamically adjust the position of your UAV such that you deploy it in an optical location, which in turn you would get an optimal performance out of it. Okay, that would be a limitation if you are going with the terrestrial based relay nodes. Hence, this UAV assisted FSO communication and its channel modeling and performance analysis especially has gained enough traction, especially in the last 2 years. I could able to see, because my research group is now heavily working on this UAV assisted FSO based communication, because you can see so many recent channel modelings and other effects are coming to come. This one is one very recent paper. If you want, you can have a look on this particular paper on hovering UAV based FSO communication, channel modeling, performance analysis, and parameter optimization. In JSAC it appeared. So, and again, this one is also very interesting work, UAV assisted free space optics communication with amplify forward relaying. So it has also appeared very recently. This particular group is working mainly on the channel modeling. Of course, what might be the additional major limiting factor in your UAV assisted FSO communication? Not a limiting factor. The factor which you need to take into consideration in your channel modeling, apart from atmospheric turbulence, pointing errors, atmospheric loss due to weather condition, the fourth major factor which you need to consider the moment you are establishing an FSO link between a particular fixed node and an UAV is the hovering effects of your UAV. Your UAV, there is a possibility that it hovers in the air. It's not a possibility, there would be, because your UAV is going to be deployed in the sensitive region of your atmosphere. Basically, as per the literature, as per my experience, which I worked in this, the first 10 to 20 kilometers of the atmosphere, right, it's going to be very sensitive, because so many layers would be there and so many deteriorating factors would be there in that atmosphere. So many irregularities would be present in the atmosphere. So the first 10 to 20 kilometers is going to be very sensitive. And if you are deploying your UAV, say at the height of say 2 to 3 kilometers from your ground level, of course, that is the most sensitive region in the atmosphere where you are establishing a link between your source and UAV. That might also lead to hovering of an UAV. That would be shaking. So of course the orientation deviation would be there, and sometimes those that deviation needs to be run. What I'm trying to say is those hovering effects also need to take into consideration that the moment you are considering your UAV based FSO communication. UAV based FSO communication, apart from, there would be definitely turbulence effects will be there, atmospheric turbulence will be there, because large scale inhomogeneities would be present in that particular region, as it is a very sensitive part of the atmosphere. Atmospheric turbulence is going to be there, and the pointing errors, the hovering effects can lead to pointing error. Hovering effects may lead to pointing error, as well as it might lead to power loss also, that is signal to noise ratio loss also. So hovering effects, as well as some misalignment might also happen because of the beam wander effects, which we have said, beam wander induced pointing error. Or if the transmitter aperture is vibrating, then that also causes the pointing error. So pointing errors, of course, it is going to be there. Of course, you also need to take into consideration the hovering effects of this particular UAV and the atmospheric loss. Mainly, if you see in the literature, these four losses, they would be taken into consideration the moment they are going into an UAV assisted FSO in comparison to fixed node based FSO communication. Fixed node based communication, there are three major effects. Okay, one is the pointing error and atmospheric turbulence effects, and third one is the atmospheric loss. And UAV assisted FSO, there will be four major effects apart from these three which I have mentioned, the hovering effects. With these four or three effects only, you have to model the particular the channel of your FSO communication. That is why channel modeling it's very important, especially in the FSO communication scenario. Depending upon the scenario with which you are using, the channel modeling would be varying. Of course, I would touch upon that the moment I discuss about our own research works which we have done related to this aerial platform. Of course, that is the starting point of this, where we worked. Of course, currently we are working with respect to UAV based FSO systems in the system models of whatever we are showing. Of course, one recent conference paper got accepted where the communication between UAV to UAV. So UAV to UAV based communication means there will be transmitter hovering and receiver hovering. Both will be hovering. Those effects also needs into consideration, and its diversity gain analysis and its performance analysis heavily was investigated between two UAV to UAV based communication. And we have modeled the channel over the generalized using generalized distributions. Of course, I will also cover what are all the distributions which are helpful in modeling this particular channel. We have taken into consideration all these effects mainly over the generalized distributions and investigated the performance, including the diversity gain. And there would also be, we also encountered, because of this hovering effects, there it leads to something called as the error floor, basically. So error floor in the sense error probability curve will keep on decaying in a regular scenario, but error floor means after in spite of the fact that you increase your SNR, okay, your error will not go down, that is, it will not decrease, whereas it reaches, it saturates, like there will be a floor region. So that is how we encountered in an UAV to UAV communication because of this hovering effect, and we predicted this error floor also, how much is that value of this error floor. This is a small work, but of course this error floors and all has not been predicted in majority of the works. Of course, we also predicted the diversity gain and the error flow. Of course, we are developing that scenario with respect to by taking into consideration multiple effects as well as relay based techniques. So this is one such work which is under consideration, which our work is heavily working on. The other work which we have good set of results is usage of this HAPS, which is one among the aerial platform based FSO for satellite communication. So HAPS, already I have mentioned, it's an aerial vehicle which is situated well above the height of 17 to 25 kilometer, and the atmospheric impact on an optical beam is less severe than directly above the ground. That is very, very important point to be noted. Your this thing now, right, your HAPS is situating of course in the height of usually 17 to 25 kilometer, which is not a major sensitive region in the atmosphere. If you see, basically the first 10 to 15 kilometer is what very, very crucial. So your HAPS is located on top of that sensitive region in the atmosphere. Of course, the effect of hovering can be nicely ignored, which is a very valid assumption if you want to take into consideration. Though there are one or two effects which they have also taken into consideration, the hovering effect, but it is not required because it is well placed above the sensitive region in the atmosphere where the hovering effects can be completely ignored. Okay, that is one advantages of using an HAPS as an aerial vehicle. So the same advantage stands for HAPS also, easier and faster deployment. If suppose it is being used as a pseudo satellite based application, compared to the deploying satellite, you can establish HAPS. Your HAPS either can act as a pseudo satellite, in place of satellite it can act. That is one application of usage of HAPS. Another one is the HAPS can also act as a relay station, an aerial platform based relay station between your ground station and your satellite. That definitely is going to improve your reliability, is what our work basically. Whether if by deploying HAPS in between your ground station and your satellite, whether is there any improvement in the reliability in the uplink scenario or in the downlink scenario. So what are all the where the improvement in the reliability comes, where the improvement in the capacity comes, depending upon which factors it comes. So those are all the investigations which we have taken into consideration. So of course the satellite to ground station links, again it mainly the performance degrades mainly due to the atmospheric turbulence which mainly exists between the 0 to 20 kilometer. From 20 kilometer, even if you are considering a low Earth orbit satellite at 620 kilometer, right, that is more of like a free space. About 20 kilometer till your satellite location of 620 kilometer, right, that is completely a free space without much of a turbulence effects. Not much. Without the turbulence effects, there would not be any pointing errors and there would not be an atmospheric loss because that region is completely not sensitive to so many things. So 0 to 20 kilometer is what is very crucial. That is how even this free space optics communication, though they say in a terrestrial point of scenario, they say it is as a low range communication, they use it for the order of few kilometers only, they use it because the terrestrial atmosphere.
Hello.
Sir.
Hello, sir. May I ask one question?
Yes, please.
Sir, turbulence effect gets into picture after how many kilometers if we consider from the Earth surface to sky?
That I will say.
As if you consider the train is sorry, not train, plane is there in the sky, and turbulence effects get occurring, but it starts after how many kilometers? So can you highlight on that?
I will highlight that, sir. Okay.
Okay.
Now I cannot directly speak. I will step by step. I am coming. Okay. So the moment I deal with this turbulence, I would say that, and I would try. Yeah,
okay,
I would try to address that. Okay.
Okay.
So you can see that. Okay. Where I was. Yes, fine. So mainly this satellite to ground station, the performance degrades mainly due to atmospheric turbulence, including the pointing errors and atmospheric loss also can be considered in this aspects, which I would have slightly missed out. That is fine. Atmospheric loss and pointing errors would be coming. But what I'm trying to say is, of course, while discussing the model, I would clearly explain which region is more sensitive. So that also was evident from our simulations and analytical computations. The first 20 kilometers is the main region which we have to concentrate or worry more about this three effects. After that, right, from the HAPS to your satellite, if you are performing, that is more of like a free space link. It is as equivalent to an AWGN channel, which you can consider. That is what our model states. It is as equivalent to that of an AWGN link, where there will not be a majority of limitations which would be coming. Anyway, so this HAPS, if it is being deployed as a relay station, of course, which we have also shown that it improves the link performance. There is a huge improvement in the reliability, which we could able to identify compared to a direct FSO link transmission between your ground station as to a satellite without HAPS. Compared to that of the direct link transmission, your HAPS based relay station plays a major role in improving the reliability. See, here also you have to understand a few things, as a cooperative relay based communication is also covered in your probably in the FDP. So cooperative relay, especially ground based relay, right? So usually if you see, there are two architectures which would be coming into play. One is the dual hop scenario. You have a source, you have a relay, and you have a destination, where the direct line of sight link will not be there. Basically, a direct line of sight link may not be there, and your relay is mainly used as like a coverage extension kind of thing. Since if there is a possibility that there is no direct line of sight link, then you would put a relay. This mainly targets on the coverage extension point of view as such, if you see, and there would not be any improvement in the diversity gain or majority of the improvement in the reliability compared to a direct link scenario. If you're having source to destination scenario without relay, and you deploy a relay but without any direct link, you would not be gain majority, you would not be gain main in terms of performance as such, but definitely you would gain in terms of the coverage extension, as this is going to establish a good coverage, this relay. But when you would get the reliability means when you have the direct link, you have the presence of direct link, the source, relay, and destination. You have, if I can switch over, wait, because I want to highlight this, because this the cooperative relay with respect to terrestrial scenario, especially with respect to RF and FSO, is slightly different. So if you see this as source to destination, there is a direct line, direct link. Of course, if you are trying to establish a relay link also using this, okay. So using this, if you are trying to establish a relay link, of course, here you would get the ultimate reliability, diversity gain, depending upon the detection scheme which you use. Of course, if you used an optimal scheme, you would get definitely a diversity gain and the other aspects in this particular scenario. But in case of your FSO communication, right, even in a ground-based relay node, if there is a dual hop scenario where you are establishing an FSO link, okay, R and D, okay, here there would be an improvement in the diversity gain compared to a improvement in diversity gain compared to your source to destination. This will not be the case in case of an RF communication. If you put your relay RF without relay, okay, especially if you are establishing an RF based communication, there would not be an improvement in the diversity gain. Both will have the same diversity gain, unless otherwise you don't have this sort of an architecture where you are introducing the second path. Of course, if in case of an FSO, right, it is slightly different. It is not in FSO scenario, the diversity gain is not the number of independent paths which you consider. Basically, the diversity gain mainly depends on the turbulence and pointing error parameters. Of course, that is where the difference lies. In FSO, we would see in the channel model what are all the main turbulence parameters and then pointing error parameters. This diversity gain mainly depends on the turbulence and pointing error parameters. So, which means like if you are trying to reduce this parameters, reduce the impact of the turbulence and pointing errors, that is going to improve your diversity gain. There comes that. So when you deploy the relay, what you are doing is you are reducing the link distance, and of course the link distance, if it is reduced, the FSO link performance would be much better. So if you are reducing the link in distance, of course you are having a control on your turbulence and pointing error parameters, which you can decrease the severity of your turbulence and pointing errors for a reduced link distance. That is going to improve your diversity gain. Okay, the diversity gain means, especially the diversity gain, you can imagine it as the slope of your performance curve. The diversity gain is very high. The slope of your performance curve, either outage or average SCR, it is going to get. It is, if the slope is increasing, which means you would be gaining in terms of the performance. That with the improvement in the SNR, it is going to decay. The error performance is going to improve drastically, or the error probability is going to decrease rapidly. That's what it leads to improvement in the slope or improvement in the diversity gain as such. Okay, there is a small difference here which I need to highlight, because there always a cooperative communication, you could able to understand it, but it is slightly different from that aspect. What I was trying to say is establishing a dual hop scenario using an FSO link. Okay, dual hop scenario for an FSO communication itself will bring you the diversity gain. That's what I am saying. Unlike your RF scenario, where your simple dual hop scenario without the presence of direct link is not going to bring your diversity gain. That's I'm going to put forth to you. So of course, now comes when I put the HAPS as a relay station between the satellite station and ground station. There you can easily understand why the performance or the link performance improves here, because there is going to be an improvement in the diversity gain compared to that of a direct link between direct communication between your satellite ground station and satellite, as well as vice versa. Okay, so if you are deploying HAPS as your relay terminal, then the whole satellite to ground station, of course, downlink or uplink can be split into two parts. One is the satellite to HAPS or HAPS to ground station. This is in case of downlink. In case of uplink, you can say ground station to HAPS and HAPS to satellite. There are two links which would be coming. So since this HAPS is located in a cloud-free atmospheric altitude, and reliability is not going to be a major concern for this satellite to HAPS link. So since that link is very clear of majority of the atmospheric effects, the reliability is not a major concern between your HAPS to satellite link. Of course, it is going to be a major concern between your ground station to HAPS. Okay, there comes the problem, as the link reliability or availability is a key concern for HAPS to ground station or ground station to HAPS. In general, it is between HAPS to ground station. It is very, very sensitive. There comes one of the solutions which we proposed is a usage of an RF as a backup link in case of an FSO link outage. There also I mentioned the importance of using an RF as a backup link because of the complementary behavior of these two links, which is FSO and RF link. Hence, the usage of RF link that can act as a backup in case if the FSO link if FSO link reaches an outage, and hence, and the main usages, as I already mentioned, the RF link is less sensitive to the atmospheric turbulence, pointing errors, or the atmospheric loss, which is mainly due to fog, snow, and haze. Okay, because of the complementary nature, kind of we can use an RF as a backup link. So there comes the usage of our system model as such. This is the system model which we have proposed and which we have worked upon heavily, where you can see a ground station, a HAPS, and then a satellite. This is more of a cloudy atmosphere to just depict that the HAPS is deployed above the cloud, means it is deployed in a cloud-free atmosphere. This is what is being mentioned. This height is mainly, we kept it as a 20 kilometer, and the majority of this height is about 620 kilometers. That is, we consider a low Earth orbit satellite. Of course, the distance and everything in the model has been taken into consideration. It is not like a simple link modeling just using distribution. It is not that. Every factors of this angle of the propagation, everything, the propagation distance, everything has been taken into consideration. The height of this ground station, height of this HAPS, and height of the satellite, everything is being taken into consideration. Of course, the relay-based concept is as synonymous. If you are establishing a decode and forward relay, yes, transmit to, that is the source. Either it can be in the uplink scenario, the source would be ground station. The downlink scenario, the source would be satellite. So source to relay and relay to destination, and we have employed a decode and forward relay. So decode and forward relay, as probably it would have been covered in the cooperative communication, it decodes, re-encodes, and forward it to the destination node. And you can see the switching scheme here, that suppose I would first use this is one such switching scheme. Probably it is the suboptimal switching scheme, or whatever first we have used, that is a suboptimal switching scheme, which is a complementary switching in nature, which is like this, which goes like this. Say, first you would give priority for FSO link transmission, and if the instantaneous SNR of this FSO link is greater than some threshold value, then your FSO link will be used basically for transmission. Suppose if there is a deterioration in the instantaneous SNR, means if it is drops below a predefined threshold value, of course we have to optimize that threshold in order to obtain the optimal performance that is there. Of course, if it is less than the predefined threshold, then it switches to RF link by switching off the FSO link. The FSO link will not come there if the instantaneous SNR is less than the threshold. It goes back to the RF link transmission. So if you can see, that particular switching scheme which I mentioned is what is called as the hard switching. Either FSO or RF. First priority to FSO. If the FSO link is not supportive, then you switch back to RF. That is one scenario, which is suboptimal in nature. The most optimal switching scheme which we found is this one, which is called as the adaptive combining, where again priority is given to the FSO link transmission. If the instantaneous SNR is greater than the threshold, of course FSO link will be transmitting. Okay. If the instantaneous SNR drops below the threshold, here you won't switch off your FSO. You would still communicate the information over both FSO and RF. When the instantaneous SNR drops below the threshold, okay, you would switch on your RF also, and you would simultaneously transmit your message signal or symbols over both FSO and RF link, and you employ a diversity combining, which is maximal ratio combining at the receiver. However, a very important point to be noted is that to enable a perfect diversity reception, the data rate in both the channels should be same. Then only you could able to enable or extract the usage of your diversity reception. So what you have to do in this case is, if the FSO link is not supportive, and if you are in a situation to use both your links for simultaneous transmission, you have to reduce your data rate of FSO link to the data rate of RF link to enable a perfect diversity combining. Okay, so first scheme, the first condition remains the same. Threshold, instantaneous SNR greater than threshold, FSO link will be used as for transmission. Instantaneous SNR less than threshold, of course, you can make use of the feedback signal to activate your RF subsystem, and the information will be transmitted over FSO link alone in case of the first switching scheme, which is suboptimal, which is hard switching. Or you can use maximal ratio combining, which means you can transmit your information, okay, over both the links, FSO and RF. However, under the condition that the data rate of FSO link is reduced to the data rate of RF link, and then you perform the maximal ratio combining. And this second scheme is what is called as the adaptive combining. Of course, since you are making use of both the links and you are performing a maximal ratio combining, so there comes the improvement in the reliability much more compared to that of the hard switching, where in hard switching either you are using FSO or RF. In adaptive combining, you are using either FSO or MRC combining of both FSO and RF, which in turn gives you the optimal performance compared to that of the first switching scheme, which I mentioned, which is hard switching. Both we have investigated in this particular system model, both the effects of this particular switching schemes in terms of performance as such. Another important point to be noted is, you can see that the RF link is acting as a backup. Of course, I told previously also, I'm just emphasizing here, it is acting as a backup link only between the ground station and HAPS. because only this particular region is very, this particular portion in the atmosphere is very, very sensitive. Of course, this is very less sensitive to channel distortion. So we have left it only with the FSO link. There is no need for a backup as an RF, because the link is quite clear. Even when the models, when we simulated it, right, the models which have been given in the literature, that particular channel model, see, of course, this channel models particularly depends on the height. Your terrestrial channel model is completely different compared to that of a satellite communication based channel model. There are so many factors which takes into consideration, especially the height of your ground station, height of your HAPS, height of your satellite, and the angle of propagation distance. Everything is being taken into consideration in that. Of course, we could able to see that this link is quite less sensitive to these channel distortions. So we didn't back up with the RF link. So this model, of course, I need not want to emphasize too much. So this is related to your FSO link, and this is related to your RF link. So Hx plus n here, H is the RF fading channel coefficient, and this particular first thing will be applicable only in the ground station to HAPS, because you are using your RF as a backup link only between that. Of course, FSO link model will be applicable from your ground station to satellite, as well as from, ground station to HAPS, as well as between HAPS to satellite, which is this I is nothing but the combined the channel coefficient of your FSO communication, which takes into consideration your atmospheric turbulence effects, and then pointing errors, as well as your atmospheric loss. Coming into the channel model, especially for your FSO communication. So if I can spend some time on this. So the most widely used, anyone please? The most widely accepted fading model is this, which is nothing but a gamma-gamma fading. That is what gamma-gamma distribution, or gamma-gamma atmospheric turbulence model, which is nothing but the product of two gamma distributions. And that helps in modeling a very moderate to strong turbulence. There is a mistake here. It is not strong to weak. It is strong to moderate turbulence scenario. So those strong to moderate turbulence scenario can be modeled using gamma-gamma distribution. Of course, there are so many things. This particular equation is mainly PDF has been written in terms of Bessel function, modified Bessel function. Of course, the main two parameters here are alpha and beta, which represents the small scale scattering or small scale turbulence parameters. These alpha and beta are the turbulence parameters. If alpha beta is very less, then the turbulence is more. If alpha beta is very large, the turbulence is severe. Okay, the turbulence is weak. The turbulence is weak if alpha beta is very large. The turbulence is severe if alpha beta is very less. It is similar to that of your fading severity in Nakagami M. When M increases, your severity decreases, right? Similarly, if your alpha beta increases, your turbulence severity decreases, which is like weak turbulence. If your alpha beta is very small, then the turbulence severity increases, which is like a strong turbulence. Okay. And if you can see, there is some variance parameter, which they call it as a Rytow variance, which typically, because this Rytow variance is coming inside your turbulence parameter. If you see your turbulence, that mainly depends on this variance parameter. They call it as a Rytow variance. And that variance mainly depends on your theta p, which is nothing but your angle of propagation, or in particular, they call it as zenith angle. Basically, the zenith angle is nothing but the angle between this vertical and the angle of propagation is what is called as the zenith angle. This theta h is the zenith angle here between ground station and HAPS, and theta s is the zenith angle between your HAPS and your satellite. So it is nothing but the angle between this particular vertical as well as between the angle of the propagation, basically. Between the zenith and the propagation orientation is what they call is as a zenith angle. So, of course, that is being taken into consideration in this Rytow variance, as well as you can see, this Cn square is nothing but the refractive index structure parameter. So, it is the refractive index which typically characterizes the atmospheric factor. So, this depending upon the refractive index structure parameter only, you classify it as turbulence, weak or strong turbulence. Of course, this turbulence parameters depends on Rytow variance, and Rytow variance in turn depends on the refractive index structure parameter, or otherwise it is called as the turbulence strength. And usually if you see the Cn square, this turbulence strength parameter, it would be typically constant for a terrestrial communication based scenario. It would be typically constant value. Say typically they use Cn square as 1 into 10 to the power of minus 13 for strong turbulence scenario, and it would be of the order of 10 to the power of minus 15 or 10 to the power of minus 17 in case of your weak turbulence scenario. So typically is of that order, but the value remains constant in case of your terrestrial scenario, because the optical wave propagation is more or less at the fixed height in your terrestrial scenario. It is not going into probably it is not traveling across the heights basically. But in case of SATCOM scenario, especially in our scenario, it completely it is depending upon the height. Basically, it travels over the height. It travels over different regions of the atmosphere, and that is why if you see, right, your Cn square, it's not a constant in your SATCOM, and it depends on the height. Basically, that's what it is. Cn square of h, basically whatever the height. The Cn square of h means if you are communicating between your ground station and your HAPS, that is the height between your ground station and the HAPS. That is h0 minus hp. That height, it depends. The Cn square in terms of height, it depends on the height as well as this parameter w, which is called as the it is called as the wind speed. Basically, the wind in the atmosphere also plays a role here. So height and then w, as well as there is one more parameter which is called the Cn square 0, which is the ground level turbulence. Whatever the turbulence which is present in the ground level, okay, that is also being taken into consideration. So ground level turbulence, the height with which your receiver is located, as well as this wind speed, all of this is taken into consideration in this particular Cn square of h, which is the refractive index structure parameter. Okay, and this is coming inside this integration, where you are integrating from h0 to hp. For the first level, if you want to compute the right of variance between your ground station to HAPS, where your ground station is located at the height of h0 and HAPS is located at the height of hp, okay, h0 to hp, you have to integrate this Cn square of h, okay, and then a constant factors also would be multiplying. These are all defined models which is available in the literature. These are all not we have derived it, we have used those models, but I'm just giving an intuitive reason for this model to make you understand compared to a typical terrestrial scenario. So you have to you have to integrate it over the height, especially the Cn square, and then takes into consideration the zenith angle propagation, and this k1 is the wave number, which is typically a constant. So theta p, in order to compute your right of variance, and that right of variance is coming inside your turbulence parameters, which is small scale and large scale turbulence parameters, which are represented as alpha and beta. There comes the importance when you evaluate this right of variance, Cn square and alpha beta, right? Okay, you are typically between your HAPS and your ground station, this particular value of alpha or beta or Cn square as such, your Cn square is pretty much very less, means the severity of the turbulence is very high, especially between your HAPS and your ground station. The severity or the turbulence strength is very, very high. Okay, which means the alpha beta value will be typically less, of the order of say 2 point something and 3 point something, which is quite less. Which is less, which is alpha beta if it is in the typical range. So alpha beta in the typical range of 2 or 3, which is quite less, means the turbulence severity is very, very high. That is what we observed between your ground station and the HAPS. Whereas if you use the same formula, or if you rewrite this formula to compute the right of variance, refractive index structure parameter, as well as turbulence parameters between your HAPS and satellite, which means you have to integrate this from height of the HAPS to height of the satellite, and as well as this h would be depending upon, this h would be varying. See, remember, this h is not the typical height. This is the integral variable basically. This Cn square h is coming inside this integral, where you are integrating with respect to the height, and the height varies from h0 to hp for the link between ground station and HAPS, and it should vary between hp and hs for the link between the HAPS and the satellite. Okay, so and because of the turbulence severity and other things taken into consideration, basically, if you see this computation of Cn square of h, this would be very large value. Cn square of h would be very large, means the turbulence strength is very weak, as well as your alpha beta will be very large. If you see the typical value of alpha beta which we got for the link between your HAPS and satellite, it is of the order of thousands and 10,000s. means the turbulence strength is severely low. Basically, the turbulence strength is negligible, or the turbulence nature is negligible, or very, very weak turbulence. So even when we just instead of for the HAPS to satellite link, we omitted this and then trying to match it with the X plus N model, which is AWG model, but still typically the curve matched with our simulations, where we perform the simulations using the exact way, and computation we approximated it to an AWGN model, but still we could able to get the match between our simulation and analytical curve, which indeed states that this particular link is very less sensitive to atmospheric turbulence conditions, which is equivalent to a free space link, or like synonymous to an AWGN link, where this particular the channel turbulence is getting averaged out. Basically, if there is not much major impact of this particular FSO channel coefficient between your satellite and your HAPS. Of course, this is what this link is very sensitive, and that is why we also backed it up using an RF link, and we come up with the switching schemes, which is hard switching and adaptive combining, and evaluated the performance. Okay, so that particular first channel model is with respect to the turbulence alone. And Poynting error, typically the channel model which they consider for one more point which I missed over here is this alpha beta, right? This I have written it in terms of your downlink scenario. Okay, you can typically see this expression in terms of downlink scenario. It is depending upon right variance, both alpha and beta. Okay, now I'm showing one alpha and beta for uplink scenario. You see this equation. I'm coming to these things after some time, but you see this equation, that is alpha SR. Okay, alpha SR means from this is uplink scenario, which means it is between your ground station and HAPS. Okay, you see the second term is more or less synonymous to your previous alpha. It is same 0.49 sigma square by 1 plus 1.11. Here there is a slightly difference in the constant, but it is more or less of the same structure. But if you see the first thing, there is an additional factors which are coming. Again, zenith angle is coming, this beam waist is coming, this W0 is the beam waist is coming. But most importantly, one factor called delta PE, which is nothing but Beam-Wander induced Poynting error parameter, is coming inside. So first thing from here, we can infer that the channel is not reciprocal in nature. Your downlink channel and the uplink channel is not reciprocal. The same the channel effects is not going to come. That is first understanding here, because if you compute alpha, the large scale turbulence parameter, the alpha beta remains the same, the large scale turbulence parameter is going to remain the same, but small scale turbulence parameter, there is a difference over here. Your alpha for your uplink scenario is going to be different from the alpha for your downlink scenario. That is the first thing, which means your alpha varies, means the turbulence varies. If your turbulence varies, your performance varies, which means of course you are not going to get the equivalent performance for your uplink and downlink scenario. Your uplink and downlink scenario are going to be very, very different. Okay, why? Then comes the question, why an additional term is considered, which means why a Beam-Wander induced Poynting error term is considered in an uplink scenario compared to that of your downlink scenario, which means there is an intuitive reason here, because in an uplink scenario, when the Beam-Wander induced Poynting error comes into picture, then the turbulent eddies are very higher of the order of the size of these eddies, the turbulence eddies, if it is greater than your beam width or beam size of your optical signal, then it is going to deflect your optical beam, which is going to cause a Poynting error. That is what is Beam-Wander induced Poynting error. That would be prone in that particular effect would be prone in an uplink scenario, because in your uplink scenario, immediately when your optical beam is encountering in your atmosphere, your beam spread or beam width would be narrower, or your beam size would be narrower compared to that of your turbulent eddies, because that's what I have really emphasized, that in the first portions of your atmospheric region, you would have a very sensitive nature. There would be so many inhomogeneities present. Your turbulent eddies would be huge in size, and it is going to be very bigger compared to that of your beam size, because at that particular point only your beam size has been propagated. Basically, it immediately encounters a big turbulent eddies, so your eddy size is going to be higher compared to that of your beam size, which definitely it is going to deflect the path of your beam, and that is going to cause your Beam-Wander induced Poynting errors, which is more prone, or which is more likely to happen in an uplink scenario compared to the downlink scenario, where in the downlink scenario, majorly the beam spread would be coming till up to satellite. There would not be much more spread in the beam, basically, if you see. But the moment it reaches into the first 5 kilometer region, which is very, very sensitive, basically, first 5 kilometer region where your turbulent eddies are very, very bigger in size compared to that of your beam width. But in your downlink scenario, this particular optical beam is encountering this turbulent eddies during the last stage of propagation. During the last stage of propagation in the downlink scenario, which means the beam size would be more or less of the order of the turbulent eddy size, or the turbulent eddy size are not going to deflect the beam from your path, because your downlink signal or optical signal is encountering this turbulent eddies, which is of larger in size, only during the last stage of the propagation, where your beam size will be of the order of your this turbulence eddy size. However, in an uplink scenario, during the first stage of propagation, immediately when the optical signal is out, it is going to encounter a huge turbulent eddies, which would be bigger in size compared to that of this beam width or beam size. That is going to deflect or cause a beam-wander induced pointing error. That is why there is a difference in this particular model in case of an uplink scenario compared to that of the downlink scenario. So you can see, as I've already mentioned, beam scintillation is mainly causes the loss of signal to noise ratio. Okay, beam scintillation is one aspect, and beam-wander induced pointing error is other aspect. These two comes under atmospheric turbulence effects, which I told. Okay, so that is what is this. So beam scintillation, of course, that is being taken into consideration in these things, alpha, beta. This is beam scintillation effects. And beam-wander induced pointing error, especially in the uplink scenario, it's being taken into consideration inside the atmospheric turbulence, because alpha SR or alpha beta, they're all the atmospheric turbulence parameters. So both the scintillation effects, which causes loss of signal to noise ratio, and beam-wander induced pointing errors, especially it will be applicable in an uplink scenario, both have been taken into consideration in your atmospheric turbulence model itself, where on an outset it is modeled using gamma-gamma distribution. Okay, this gamma-gamma distribution has these two main parameters, which depends on so many other parameters, of course. But coming into the misalignment or pointing errors, which happens due to the vibrations or misalignment in the link, okay, which is mainly due to the orientation mismatch of your transmitter receiver apertures. Okay, basically that pointing error is mainly modeled using Rayleigh distribution, because of the fact, a typical fact like this. Suppose this is your aperture. This is your aperture, which is a circular aperture. Okay, this is your aperture, and if you see this as your beam size, okay, typically this is your beam. Okay, this is your optical beam, received optical beam. You can see that your center of your optical beam should at least coincide more or less with your center of your aperture, so that huge power gets concentrated into that aperture, and you can able to convert the optical signal which is falling on the detector into an equal electrical signal. This would be a typical mismatch, which means this beam, center of this beam should be here or nearer to this, of course, but it is being deviated. So it is kind of a radial displacement you can able to link. Okay, so there is a kind of a radial shift in this. So that radial shift will have typically an X component and Y component, a horizontal component and vertical component, or a radial displacement can be decomposed or can be converted into an horizontal displacement as well as vertical displacement. The horizontal displacement and vertical displacement, which can be mentioned as X and Y, can be modeled as a Gaussian distribution. Of course, it gets connected. Your radius, which is going to be root of X square plus Y square. Okay, X is Gaussian and Y is Gaussian. R is nothing but probably the modulus of this, if I consider this as R prime, which is X plus JY, that is the radial displacement. This modulus of, the radial displacement R, it is going to be modulus of R prime, which is X plus JY, where X and Y are Gaussian distributed. So which means R, as you know that it follows the Rayleigh. If it is complex Gaussian, and if you take the amplitude or the modulus of that, okay, which is square root of X square and plus Y square, this is going to follow a Rayleigh distribution. Okay, that is why this pointing error typically modeled using Rayleigh distribution, of course, under the assumption that this X and Y is having typically zero mean. Okay, so of course you could also see in the literature that this pointing error is being modeled using Rayleigh distribution, which is also called as the Borside based pointing errors. So this pointing error, the modeling is like this turbulence multiplied with the Poynting error, IA multiplied with IP multiplied with atmospheric loss. This is the typical channel coefficient of an FSO link. Turbulence, IA, which follows gamma distribution. Of course, the radial displacement follows this particular Rayleigh distribution in case of Poynting error. Of course, IP is linked to this radial displacement. Okay, so you have to apply power transformation on random variable. Remember the fact that IP is not Rayleigh. Your radial displacement is Rayleigh, and IP is proportional to exponential of minus R square, where R is Rayleigh distributed. So of course, here you have to apply transformation of random variable and then get the PDF of IP. And IL, as per the Beers-Lambert's law, it is nothing but the atmospheric loss, where you have to take into consideration the atmospheric coefficient over the height. That is why integration is coming 0 to L. That is the propagation distance. You have to integrate the atmospheric coefficient, and then you have to take into consideration all three. You have to find the PDF of the combined channel irradiance, which is typically slightly involved steps of computation, which is like you have to rely on conditional probability, because see, IA is random variable, gamma, IP is another random variable, and IL is kind of a constant. So you have to apply probably functions of random variable concept here, of course, with conditional probability, because two multiplication of random variables are coming here, and then you have to obtain this PDF, which is given over here. So, I do not want to go into the detailed steps due to the time constraint. Of course, I'm mainly concentrating on the channel modeling part of it. So, of course, you can write the instantaneous SNR, which is proportional to this channel fading coefficient square, and then you could also find the SNR statistics, which is more or less same to that of an RF-based scenario. But yes, there this point of this responsivity factor, all those factors will be coming. Responsivity means this conversion of your optical to electrical current, those responsivity of that circuit, those parameters also takes into consideration in your instantaneous SNR. And you would also find your the moment you find the statistics of this combined channel coefficient on FSOI, you can also obtain the channel coefficient. You can also obtain the statistics of your SNR. So RF, in our model, we have used two models. One is the Raytheon based model. Of course, there is a higher possibility that a strict line of sight exists between your ground station and the HAPS. So we considered Raytheon. And of course, if there is any shadowing associated with that, we have also considered a shadowed Raytheon based modeling. So I do not want to go in depth of these two modelings, as it is more oriented to the RF modelings, which subsequently would have been covered in any one of your lectures, either in form of Rayleigh or some and then how to find the PDF statistics. Of course, that would have been covered under that assumption. I'm leaving this part. Of course, we have considered our RF model as one as Raytheon, another one is shadowed Raytheon. Of course, we are now working on some more generalized RF models and other aspects. So this I have already touched upon. Basically, this I have already covered heavily. What would be the difference in the channel characteristics, especially in a terrestrial scenario? Your CN square remains constant. Satellite uplink scenario, where your beam-wander induced Poynting error would be coming into play, as well as satellite downlink scenario, where beam-wander induced Poynting error is not going to come into consideration. There are three different aspects of this channel characteristics. And if you see a simple outage analysis, if you have to perform, so basically the outage analysis for a dual hop scenario, this is the typical expression. The dual hop scenario will not be in outage when both ground station to HAPS and HAPS to satellite link will not be in outage. And 1 minus of that is going to give that the dual hop link is going to go in outage, which in turn is nothing but the outage of source to relay link, outage of relay to destination link, and the product of the outage of source to relay and relay to destination link. This outage is nothing but our CDF computation, which I have already computed, and we have taken into consideration. Remember, if in uplink scenario, source to relay is nothing but your ground station to HAPS. Okay, there a hybrid link is involved. So the outage of your source to relay link, okay, hybrid link is nothing but the product of the CDF of both FSO and RF link. The hybrid link will be in outage when both FSO and RF link are going to be in outage. So there, the outage of source to relay link is going to be typically the product of the CDF of the individual links. Okay. Similarly, the same concept. This I definitely would have been covered definitely by Selvaraj sir and his students, because they typically worked on the error probability analysis in a dual hop scenario. the same has been taken into consideration. However, an approximation has been done. Of course, there would be another summation term which comprises of this paired error probabilities. Of course, sir would have mentioned that we have neglected, because in this particular scenario, even if we include this term of paired error probability, which comprises of that fourth term, it is not affecting. Even if we ignore it, is not affecting the performance. It is almost matching with our simulations, which we have performed exactly. So it is an approximate version. So this computation of this conditional probability is more or less same in the case of an RF based communication. Of course, the channel modeling and the channel characteristics and typically the models which we have taken into consideration is different from that, and we used a conditional ACP which is fairly this is again, and we have not used the typical the integration 0 to pi by m m-1 exponential minus gamma sine square pi by m for an MPSK modeling, which we have not used the Craig formula. We have used, of course, ERFC based formula, and it would be a good fit for the condition when the modulation order is greater than 2. For m equal to 2, there will be a slight, very slight mismatch, because for m equal to 2, this particular conditional error probability will act as an upper bound. For m greater than 2, it typically matches with most of the modulation schemes which we have used. So this I need not want to go typically into the detailed derivation. Of course, this one, this typically the error probability computation in hybrid link, it's very important. First, error probability in hybrid link is, first you would be considering the error probability over FSO link, and that FSO link is under the condition that your instantaneous SNR is greater than the threshold. So you have to integrate your error probability over the FSO link from gamma threshold to infinity, conditional error probability, averaged it out over the instantaneous SNR statistics. Of course, there were issues which you will face in the convergence. So that is why we split this into this, like 0 to infinity minus 0 to gamma threshold, which we have evaluated. Okay, so FSO link transmission takes place in the hard switching scheme, provided the instantaneous SNR is greater than the threshold. If the instantaneous SNR is less than the threshold, which has been taken into consideration inside this outage probability of FSO, instantaneous SNR less than the threshold means it reaches the outage, then you would use the RF link, irrespective of the channel condition of the RF, we would be using it. So that is why the BR factor is coming over here, multiplied with this P out, and BR is nothing but typically you have to average your conditional error probability over the SNR statistics of the RF channel. That is what, from 0 to infinity. So this is how it is being linked. And you can typically see this would be the diversity gain under different scenarios which we have predicted out of it. So that is very important. As I have already mentioned, the zeta square is there, right? That zeta square is the pointing error severity parameter. Okay, how much intense this pointing error severity. Okay, so that that zeta, if it is very high, right, the pointing error severity is less. If it is less, the pointing error severity is very high. That means you can see that in a typical, this diversity gain is similar to that of an FSO system. Your FSO system diversity gain is nothing but minimum of zeta by 2, alpha by 2, beta by 2, which means it typically depends on the turbulence parameters and the pointing error parameters. Okay, that's what I am telling. So your alpha and beta typically depends on your Cn square, and the Cn square, it depends on your height of the propagation in case of SATCOM, and it would be typically depend on the length factor in case of your terrestrial communication, which means when you are varying the length, okay, and if you are putting the length of, if you are putting your relay, of course you are changing the length. If the length varies, your alpha, beta, and zeta typically depends on the link distance will be varying. And if you are trying to reduce the link distance, what you are doing is typically you are increasing the value of this alpha, beta, zeta, typically, which means you are improving the diversity gain actually. So that is how the improvement in the diversity gain is coming when you are deploying the relay as such. Okay, so what we have identified is when typically if you are using the SNR link as a fixed average SNR link, RF SNR, if you are fixing it as such, if the RF SNR is fixed, then there would not be anything you would gain due to the diversity gain from the RF link. Of course, if the RF link SNR is very high, as well as this optimum threshold value, if you are trying to use, right, then you could able to extract the diversity gain benefit from the RF also, because you can see it is zeta by 2 plus 1 factor is coming. This plus 1 is due to the RF link. So of course, there are some conditions with which you would get this full diversity gain compared to this. This is as equivalent to that of an FSO system diversity gain. However, you would get an SNR gain. There would not be improvement in the slope. However, there would be improvement in terms of SNR gain, which you would get used because of this RF link. Okay. However, if you are using a typical optimum threshold, as well as if the RF link SNR is also typically varied as along with the FSO link, if it tends to infinity when you compute, you would get a typical full diversity gain, which is zeta square by 2 plus 1, comma alpha by 2 plus 1 by beta by 2 plus 1. This is the full diversity gain which you could able to get from your hybrid FSO/RF based systems. Of course, the dual hop will have a better diversity gain compared to that of a single hop because of the change in the values of alpha, beta, and zeta. Okay, so this is the other diversity combining or the switching scheme, which I don't want to go ahead because this typically itself will require one more session of handling, because adaptive combining is quite tricky in terms of evaluation, though the system model is quite simple. If it is FSO only over FSO, if the instantaneous SNR is less than the gamma threshold, then you would combine it using an MRC key scheme. So there are so many conditions as such over here. The channel statistics derived over here is slightly involved compared to that of the direct hard switching. Of course, this is the optimal combining. You would get a better performance using adaptive combining using compared to that of a hard switching scheme. So ultimately, I will just give one major inference obtained from our systems, basically. So you could able to see from this particular performance curves, I would quickly wrap it up by saying that your dual hop hybrid system, which means you have a ground station, a HAPS, and then a satellite. Okay, it performs better than your single hop FSO. Without HAPS, you establish an FSO link alone between ground station and satellite, as well as a dual hop FSO, which means you put HAPS source to, that is ground station to HAPS FSO link, HAPS to satellite FSO link without backup RF link. Okay, you could able to see that the coding gain, or as such, there is no coding as such here, it is SNR gain. So it is typically of the order of around 10 dB at the SCP value of 10 to the power of -2 itself. You could able to gain huge in terms of this adding a reliable backup link between this source, between this ground station and HAPS. That is one major observation. As well as what we observed is, typically when the zenith angle propagation is typically low, right? Okay, when theta p is less, the distance of propagation would be very high. When the distance of propagation is very high, it would be more prone to those parameters of this FSO link, which degrades the performance. Okay, so zenith angle, if it is very less, 40 degree or 50 degree, it is going to affect. And then wind velocity, of course, if it is very high, it is going to affect. And this SNR gain, what we observed is, typically the SNR gain which we are getting because of this backup RF link would be higher when the wind velocity is higher, as well as this zenith angle is, that is the distance of propagation is higher. Means, okay, over very adverse channel conditions, we could able to get a higher SNR gain because of this RF link. Because of the fact that when the channel conditions are adverse, okay, what happens is typically it would rely on, it would switch often to an RF link. Basically, it would typically switch over to RF link often, and it helps in improving the reliability to a greater extent. Because in an adverse channel condition, it mainly, the probability that it switches to an RF link is typically higher compared to that of staying in the FSO link, which in turn we could also get a better SNR gain because of this backup RF link. Of course, we would compromise on the capacity aspect, because the capacity aspects using an FSO link is typically higher. The moment you switch over to RF, you are compromising on the capacity. Since we have not, of course, we have not shown here, but we have few results which have been published in terrestrial based systems that you would only compromising to a smaller extent your capacity. However, you would gain in terms of reliability to a larger extent because of this hybrid FSO RF systems compared to that of an RF based, compared to that of an FSO based systems. These are all typically a numerical optimization which we have performed for typically finding the optimum threshold parameter which gives the minimum simple error probability. As well as another final inference which we got over there is, that is typically a very important inference, that this usage of HAPS, that is conversion of this single hop to dual hop scenario, were more appreciated, especially in case of your uplink scenario, which means your HAPS could able to improve the scenario to a larger extent, especially in the uplink scenario compared to that of the downlink scenario, because in the uplink scenario, the effect of Beaman-Vander induced pointing error is also there. So the usage of HAPS as well as this usage of backup RF link were playing a vital role in improving the performance in case of an uplink scenario compared to that of a downlink scenario, where there weren't a huge improvement as such with the help of HAPS or something we could able to achieve in a downlink scenario, where the link is also clear from the Beamwander induced pointing error aspects also. So there wasn't much more gain which we are getting from the downlink scenario. Of course, the HAPS as a usage for an uplink scenario, we could able to gain much more in terms of performance with the help of a backup RF link. So these are all some of the results which we got. Of course, as a concluding remark, significant improvement in the performance and diversity gains have been obtained by deploying HAPS between a ground station and satellite, especially for uplink. No or insignificant improvement in the performance is obtained for the downlink scenario, which is what is our observation. Of course, hybrid RF system performs better in terms of average simple error probability and outage than the typical FSO based systems in both single hop and dual hop scenarios. And backup RF link provides better systems under the conditions, better gain under the conditions of high pointing errors, high zenith angle. High zenith angle means high propagation distance. So much more degradation in the performance. So the probability of usage of RF link is high. In turn, you get a high SNR gain, of course, with high wind velocity. Also, full diversity gain benefit can be extracted from your hybrid systems only when both SNR and RF links are varied and tends to infinity with an optimum switching threshold SNR assumption. Under these two conditions, you could able to get the full diversity gain. Of course, if any of these conditions is being violated or relaxed, then the diversity gain of your hybrid FSO RF system is synonymous or equal to the diversity gain of an FSO system. However, you would gain in terms of an SNR gain. However, you gain in terms of SNR, not with respect to diversity. That is what is mentioned over here, that the diversity gain of an hybrid will be equal to the diversity gain of FSO under the condition when the average SNR is fixed, as well as when you are not operating using an optimum switching threshold. This I have not covered, but I could able to see, at least I have told the system model, this adaptive combining of course performs better in terms of the SCP or an outage compared to that of the hard switching scheme, and as it is the most optimal switching combining. So these are all the typical as and when during the presentation I have mentioned also some typical publications below the references, but this typically the work on this SATCOM and other things, it has been we have published it in VTC, NCC, as well as recently it got accepted in transactions on aerospace and electronic systems. This one is accepted in Access. Mainly these two are my BTech students. With the help of the BTech students, we could able to target a good journal, and an advanced version of this is also under review in Photonics journal as well as Journal of Lightwave Technology. So some works are going in this direction, and recently one conference paper also got accepted related to UAV based FSO communication. So typically we are working in this areas, and somehow at least some are getting accepted in good journals, and we are proceeding forward in these areas. I would also send the slides for your reference. You can download and check into the detailed analysis of this. So thank you. So questions, please. Spam in the chat. Thank you, sir. Fine. Any questions, please? I hope the previous audience asked one question. I hope I addressed that. How the turbulence would be varying. Yes, the turbulence would be very severe. Probably it would be like this. The turbulence would be quite similar, quite severe in the first 3-4 kilometers. After that, the turbulence keeps on decreasing. After 20 kilometers, the turbulence will be null and void as such. Basically, that's how the inference is coming in the turbulence parameters alpha beta between the HAPS and the satellite link, though the link distance is very high. See, obviously from the terrestrial point of view, if we want to understand the FSO system, the link distance is very high. It is more prone to turbulence is what is the understanding in the terrestrial system. Of course, if the link distance is high, the propagation distance would be high, then it is more prone to the channel effects. So the turbulence parameters will be less, which means it implies strong turbulence. But that is not the case between HAPS to satellite, because that link is probably free of all the atmospheric channel distortions. That is why the link modeling and the parameters which you are taking into consideration is very, very important. SATCOM link modeling is completely different from the terrestrial link modeling, where you could able to see that the turbulence parameters are very high, which means it is negligible turbulence between your HAPS and satellite, in spite of the fact that the link distance is longer. Of course, the first 0 to 20 kilometer, you could able to see that that link is more sensitive to channel distortions, which you would get typically less value of alpha beta, which means more turbulence. And that is why the RF link has been used as a backup only between that source to, that is ground station to HAPS or HAPS to ground station, but not between HAPS to satellite. This is one such typical use case where we evaluated the end-to-end performance. Of course, the hovering effects has also not been taken into consideration, because it is a very valid assumption that you are placing above the cloud atmosphere where the hovering effects may not come into picture. Of course, you can also take into consideration, of course, if you are using an UAV-based, UAV-assisted FSO systems, then your hovering modeling also need to be taken into consideration, which is quite simple. Using delta function, you could able to model it, your hovering based. It is very simple, like if there is some concept called the detector field of view. The detector will have some field of view. If your received signal is falling within the field of view of your detector, you could able to receive your major portion of your optical signal. So it is like when the angle of arrival theta a, if it is less than or within the field of view, okay, then the waveform is being received. Okay, if it is greater than the field of view, then it is it is implied that it is not received. So using a delta and 1 minus delta function, you could able to model this this typically the hovering effects of this. So whether the angle of arrival is within the field of view of the receiver or outside the field of view of the receiver. So with this, you could able to model the hovering effect. See, typically here you could not able to see any error floor as such, if you see, which means when the SNR improves, your outage decays or simple error probability completely is decaying only. But in an UAV assisted system, when you are taking your hovering effect into consideration, there would be an error floor also. After a typical SNR value, the simple error probability value will be maintaining constant, which is like an error floor, which mainly comes because of this angle of arrival fluctuations, in turn, which arises mainly due to hovering. Probably in other session or something, when we get full-fledged results out of those works, I could able to address those things. Yes. So anything if you can.
Any other questions from the audience? Okay, if there are no other questions, then we can close the session. So I immensely thank Dr. Swaminathan for his very informative and very, what do you say, very interesting topic. Why this topic is very interesting means it has a lot of future research scope. This area especially has a lot of research problems, and the researchers who intend to work, definitely they can read the publications of Dr. Swaminathan, and there are many interesting results are available, and you can make use of this opportunity to explore this area, because this is an introductory talk. So there are many more results are available in the literature. So you can just make use of those ideas in the literature. So with this note, I would like to thank Swaminathan again for, in spite of his busy schedule, he is given his time. So thank you, Dr. Swaminathan.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. No problem. I will share the slides with you, sir. You can share.
Yes,
it.
sir.